So again, welcome. My name is Carl Allen. I'm the CEO and founder of Formative Technologies. Today is the first in a series of webinars where we are going to be talking about a reimagining of student mobility. I'm going to give you a little introduction of Formative and our work and what we do, and cast our vision for you of how we think about the landscape, how we think about the challenges of student mobility, and get into talking a little bit of what we think the kinds of solutions that are necessary in order to get us to the future of student mobility and student mobility systems that we believe we need to get to. So who am I? I come to this work with a very kind of zigzag path of my own. Was an engineer and studied urban planning and public policy. Also was a classroom teacher in the Peace Corps in West Africa, have worked in school administration at a charter school network, and then most relevant was director of transportation for Boston Public Schools for several years. I started Formative, this company, in 2018, and my co-founders, Mark Joseph and Rajiv Bajaj, similarly bring a broad kind of outsiders, but ancillary perspective, very relevant, a more holistic perspective to student mobility from their experience around the country. So when we started Formative, it was on this basis of this shared understanding of, and this challenge that we saw, that schools were evolving, education was evolving, and away from one-size-fits-all learning models, but transportation felt stuck, and it felt like it wasn't quite delivering. It was a burden on schools. It was costly. And it was under-delivering for students and families. And so we set out to reimagine that. Formative's mission is a broad one, and we think about multimodal student mobility, and we manage multimodal student mobility using technology with the goal of expanding options, enhancing service and safety and sustainability, with the aim that the vision that all students could have access to the learning opportunities that maximize their individual potential. And so, again, we have a very broad mission, and intentionally so. And I want to talk a little bit about, some of these keywords that you see in our mission, and to enlist you today in this mission. There's folks here from all different parts of this ecosystem are connected to student mobility in different ways and have different perspectives. And we're trying to bring that in and bring you all together to start sharing this new language and sharing this new vision. So practically, Formative's work, that is our very broad mission. Practically, what we've been doing for the last 5 years is managing, using technology, predominantly charter schools, but also some non-school systems, but actually helping schools in the Twin Cities, where I am now. I'm in St. Paul. In Houston, Texas, and Indianapolis, and in Phoenix, Arizona, as well as some new markets now, with vendor management and routing and system design and implementation and oversight of systems as they're operating to help schools have more adaptive and sustainable systems that flex more to meet their needs. And our consultative work with big districts and state systems and others that you can see listed here involves a lot of the same thing. Again, very broad-based view, thinking about with a very data-focused lens on system design, expanding options, and again, looking at things very holistically and broadly, multimodally. Today, what I want to talk about, and what this is all about, again, is enlisting you all in some of this new language, some of these new concepts, new ways of thinking about student mobility. You'll notice even the term student mobility, a little bit different and broader than school transportation or busing. But we're really thinking about individualized solutions that help meet the individualized needs for students. And we really think broadly about that. And so we're trying to build this new taxonomy, bring new kinds of folks together from across the spectrum, those that think about policy and funding, and those that are operators and tech providers, those that are teachers and administrators and designing school systems, and even those thinking more broadly about public transportation and just mobility more broadly within our communities. And so as part of launching this webinar series, we're also launching a new website, which we are calling which is the studentmobilityhub.formative.org. It is a work in progress, but we're launching it now. It's got a pretty comprehensive and broad outline that you can see where we're going. You can see some of the ideas and toolkits and concepts that we are going to be populating. There's a set of introductory materials that are already there, some policy materials that are there, and what we're calling kind of School Mobility 101, 102, and our view of these broad challenges in student mobility. And so I want to invite you to this hub. I hope to see it grow. I hope to have you all contribute to it. We've also, there's a resources page that includes resources from others, not just us, and that we think are relevant and interesting and in line with our thinking in terms of the future of student mobility. So today, I'm going to be giving you an introduction to how we think about student mobility, how we think about the challenges of student mobility, and then again, hoping to engage you in these future webinars, and then also to engage you in this broader effort, which Formative as a business, we are providing solutions for schools, we are consulting and supporting schools, but ultimately we see this as an ecosystem problem, and we know that we can't certainly do it alone, that we need to partner with other kinds of operators, other tech providers, the other folks that have expertise and can deliver on this broader ecosystem vision that we have. And so that's what this is also about, is building a coalition of folks that are invested in seeing this future take shape, which is one where students have equitable access to individualized learning opportunities, and that system, as a system, broadly speaking, we can deliver on that for them in a sustainable way. So that's what this is all about. And today is our overview. So as an activator, Jesse from my team is going to share in the chat a quick quiz, just 3 questions. So there's a link coming in the chat for a quick Google poll. And I've listed some candidate challenges here. We could probably think of more. We will talk about more of these, but want to get a sense from y'all in the room what you think. If you had to rank from the group of candidate challenges here, what do you think are the top 3 most pressing challenges in student mobility today? So I'm going to take just a few 30 seconds to let you all do that. Go to the Google form, and then I'll throw that screen up, and we'll see what it looks like. Again, if you're just coming in, we've got a link to a quick Google form in the chat, and just waiting for folks to respond. Top 3 most pressing challenges you see facing student mobility today. All right, so got a lot of responses coming in. keep putting them there if you haven't yet, but I'll share my screen just interesting to see what folks are saying. Oops. All right. Not too late to respond. Okay, so not surprisingly, bus driver shortage, a top vote getter. Um, Unreliable service, high costs. COVID not featuring as prominently as it might have a year or two ago, obviously. Okay, interesting spread, and you can see, yeah, again, bus driver shortage. Clearly, that's the thing that's what's in the news. That's what I'm sure to varying degrees all of us, many of you are facing or thinking about, grappling with in different markets and in different ways. But anyway, very interesting, quick poll, and I think in line with where I presumed you all might be. And so looking at that, considering that, I'm going to go back to my deck today. What we're going to talk about is kind of a framework that Formative has developed, that we've developed to help us think about the challenges, and maybe, maybe my hope is that the way we're thinking about it maybe broadens your view a bit. Again, we've got a diverse array of people participating today from, I think, different vantages and expertise from different parts of this big elephant, right? And you may understand that proverbial elephant where you know some part of it very well, but my goal here is to try to present a view of the broader picture, and even, not just student mobility, but on its own or in isolation, but how it connects to broader issues. So what we can all agree on is that we've got major challenges in student transportation. I don't think anyone would disagree there. You might disagree what the biggest challenges are, but I think what we probably would all agree is that a choice isn't a choice, or an opportunity isn't an actual opportunity unless you can get there, unless a student can actually physically get there. Now, you might say, remote learning is truly, it is an option for certain kinds of things, but I think we also learned during COVID that there oftentimes, most of the time, I think there isn't a substitute for in-person interaction, for in-person learning. We know this to be true, and so transportation is a key part of that. And again, broadly construed, it can be including walking and that sort of thing, not just school buses. But so therefore, lack of transportation or disparate access to transportation becomes a barrier to equitable access. And so if we want to achieve true equitable access and a student-centric future, so we embrace the idea that students ought to have, and families ought to have, the ability to shape the educational program, and we want to give people choices and options to shape the kind of education that they receive. And so in order to do that, then we need more sophisticated mobility systems, and that these systems need to be connected. You can't disconnect these efforts with the work that's going on in education to innovate and create portfolios of innovation schools and districts, and with charter schools and magnet schools, and policies that are supporting families, and how these systems are funded, the layout, the orientation, and the nature of these programs themselves, the facilities that these programs take place in, how location decisions are made, the evolution of the labor economy, this recognition that the bus driving role, as it were, is not what it doesn't have the appeal that it used to, that there's other competition out there, that it's hard to find teachers too, and that we have to make offerings that are rich and full and connected to purpose and mission and pathways for people, but also that this work, as is education, is connected to broader reform efforts, and it's connected to housing. I talk about school location choice, so this is connected to housing policy and zoning in cities. It's connected to climate change. It's connected to public transit and mobility broadly for the whole community, not just for students. And therefore, it's also connected to public infrastructure and sidewalks and streets and safety. And so we, again, starting to frame here, this is our very broad view that we want everyone to start thinking in. So student mobility within that also is a diverse space. It's not just yellow buses, and some district systems or a transportation department, let's say, may construe transportation in that manner. Again, this is why we're using the word student mobility, because if you go out and look on the curb, what you'll actually see is there's, even where student transportation at a particular school, is described one way, what you'll actually see is that students and families and organizations and others that care about getting students to these opportunities or that are creating the opportunities, they do whatever it takes to get kids to these opportunities and to pay for it. And so they're making all manner of different choices. So we have yellow buses, and we have, which still transports about a third of all students. We've got parents, in fact, private modes, biggest one being parents driving their own kids, taking the majority of the load now as the leading mode in the US in terms of student mobility. Used to be walking and biking back in the day, the quaint old days, that not so. That's been very much on the wane. And what you can see with one editorializing on parent transport, this is one of the key things where, and you can imagine that not everyone has equitable access to that option, whether parents have a vehicle or the flexibility to take their students. But nonetheless, we have parents taking the lion's share of those trips. We've got public transit, we've got smaller vehicles, and then we've got new modes emerging. That is parents coordinating. Maybe that's always happened, but now we have tech-enabled forms of that. We've got ride shares, we've got new kind of forms of transit, semi-fixed transit, micro transit, folks working together, e-scooters, direct payments to parents in lieu of transportation, and other kinds of options, and then different entities providing the services. So again, we're thinking outside the box. We're thinking of this whole ecosystem, and that includes districts and charters, out of school time providers, private schools, micro schools, a new thing, and parents themselves. Some operations are in-house, some are outsourced. There's a whole array of vendors and providers out there. There are brokers and managers, of which, that's part of what Formative does. There's transit agencies and nonprofits that provide public transit-like service or rideshare service or walking supports, and local governments that, Ramsey County, where I am, provides foster care transportation, or state systems that do regional transportations. And then there's, as I said, other providers, tech providers and tech-enabled solutions and SaaS solutions that are providing supports that help parents or help schools or help operators do things a different way or help with what they're already doing. So that's the context. That's where we're working in this integrated, very complicated ecosystem. And so here's how we think about the problems. Okay, so I'm gonna zoom out for a second. This is a problem framework that we've developed, and the core premise is that, okay, transportation is a fundamental access barrier. We've got a whole slew of existing challenges that are these gray boxes above here. But then on top of that, we have these really acute and increasing really important dynamics in supply and demand that I want to talk about. And our goal here, again, is to define this problem in a broader and more comprehensive way, so that will inform the kinds of solutions and the sorts of ecosystem that we think needs to come about. So just to zoom in on the current context, and I'll offer some examples. We've broken it down to, there we go. The policy and the funding puzzle. System fragmentation. This is a core idea that we think is central. It's literally in the center of the model here. And capacity gaps. That is, a lot of that has to do with, of no fault of our own, we within the system, and schools and families and operators and all of us don't have the capacity yet to meet this charge, this new charge, and we aren't there yet, in a matter of speaking. So starting with the policy and funding puzzle, across our country, there's a whole array, a patchwork of state level regulations around how you can transport students to and from schools, how these things are funded. There's a federal framework that's consistent across the country, but a ton of state and even local and district level variations. There are misaligned incentives. we'll talk a little bit about one incentive that we think formative thinks is misaligned, um, that kind of brought us to our orientation as a multimodal manager, which is that, if you were selling a mode or you're a vendor of a particular mode, then you're inclined to advance your business interests and supply that mode. So, what I experienced in Boston, what I've experienced in the charter school setting, is that often my operator was not the one that was striving daily to come up with the ideas to help me disrupt their business or reduce their routes or help me come up with another way to get students to school. That was my job as transportation director, but I wanted formative to be a business that um, aligned its incentives with the schools and helped really and had the incentive to bring about a lower marginal cost, diverse mix of options for families. And I think just as a system writ large right now, this is a really important issue to illustrate. Another one that's interesting to talk about is a product of the policy and funding environment. So a great example is McKinney-Vento, where there's a federal mandate to provide services for students that have become homeless or displaced that meet a certain definition of homeless or highly mobile. And that's so that they're able to keep their school of origin, no matter where they're housed. And so, but then how that plays out in different states is very, very different depending on a number of factors, but in particular, the funding environment in those states. So two good examples that illustrate the contrast are in Minnesota, where we work, and also Texas. So in Minnesota, the state generously reimburses to the tune of 95% of McKinney-Vento transportation. This is true of transportation of students with special needs as well. The result, coupled with a more liberal environment for providers, so vans are allowed, sedans are allowed with minimal vehicle modifications and so on. What has resulted is a proliferation of small vehicle transport and vendors and schools providing a ton of great responsive McKinney-Vento and special education services. So strong incentive to provide that service. Schools are reimbursed. It also kind of creates an interesting perverse incentive to overclassify. So these incentives are really, really important. Versus in Texas, where schools may have, they have their general fund, their general budgets, which they, charters, for example, may receive funding for transportation just like public schools, but no additional funding besides maybe a slim, additional amount of Title I funds or some not persistent state funding and support for McKinney-Vento transportation. So they can't typically provide it. And so that really affects the placement decisions, whether they can maintain the school of origin for a student, whether they can provide transportation service that's at all accommodating or useful to get the student to school. And so it disproportionately causes students to leave their schools of origin or for schools to underclassify students as McKinney-Vento. Administrative hurdles, constraints, and ambiguity. This is, gosh, it's really complex. And everybody who's tried to hire a CDL driver knows how complex it is. But also, even if you're a very well-informed and smart vendor, you need teams of people, researching the ever-changing policy environment and the process to qualify drivers, to qualify vehicles, to meet the mandates and constraints, things like lack of testing sites. Folks have experienced this, or appointments to fill driver slots. So system fragmentation. We talk a bit about this. Fragmentation as a concept, I would put up there as singularly the biggest feature of what inhibits the formation of this kind of future ecosystems that we envision. And so thinking about the concept broadly, I'm talking about organizations and how they're governed. I'm talking about the way also that partially as a result of how these organizations and how they're governed are how that's set up, then interventions are also disconnected. And yet you've got this overlap, right? That just is not being exploited. So districts next to other districts with charters in their midst, with all manner of out-of-school time providers, with all manner of micro schools and home schools and athletic programs and all kinds of opportunities abounding for students that are on top of one another, all of them going it alone, trying to provide service, or some unable to provide it at all, because they're not coordinating. There's no data sharing, understanding of the broader system dynamics, the demand, and how the supply that's there could be leveraged differently to provide access to those students. And so again, if we able to step back and think about the ecosystem, the broader public mission of education, what we're trying to do as a citizenry, as communities, to educate our kids and provide them opportunities, we need to address this fragmentation. The last thing is capacity gaps. So to do what I'm talking about, we've got a lot of gaps in technology. We need more ways for solutions to integrate. We need more ways for solutions to adapt to changing needs, and the recognition that if you look at a bus route and you look at the planned ridership, but then you actually go to the curb, and if you talk to families day after day and you look at the actual utilization of seats on district or school provided transportation, you'll see that the underlying demand there is actually much more complex. And so the changes, the ways that students are using the transportations is really complex. Technology is needed to be able to keep up, to communicate, to adapt to changes. That's a lot of data, a lot of integrations, or even to know where there's capacity, where there's a need. Human capital shortages. So we don't have enough CDL drivers. We also don't have enough, systems and folks working within systems that right now are, thinking about things in these ways, or that can wrangle the data, manage the technology systems, the logistical complexity in order to manage a system like this. What we're talking about is going from old school yellow bus to something that looks, maybe more like Amazon, or FedEx. And so we need to invest in people. And it's not just recruiting more drivers. And then outmoded mindsets, which is, thinking differently, thinking more broadly about what it means to provide transportation, what mobility support looks like. That's from providers or from districts or schools, also from families, that actually maybe a provision of a yellow bus that picks you up at your house may not be possible. And if if your choice is something that's further afield, you may have some trade-offs to make, and may have to recalibrate your expectations with respect to what can be provided, what's equitable, and how you might be able to get there. Also, a big one I want to mention here is just, and something that stymies innovation in this space is, I think, a closed-minded view of safety. So clearly, the yellow bus is a tank and is very safe, and data bears that out from a standpoint of crash safety, which is very important, which is critical. There are other key safety features of a school bus, not to minimize it at all: stop arms and crossing gates and flashers and all the things, and the school bus yellow, and these things we know. We've built the school bus to be safe, and it is safe. But that, a couple of things. One, there are other dimensions of safety that matter to parents, and to schools and to kids, and tracking and communication, and actually better ways that we can do now with technology, of tracking and monitoring risky behaviors and the kinds of behaviors that we know are linked to accidents, and how can we prevent those things in a smart way. Technologies that can assist and warn drivers of potential impacts or lane departures or erratic driving or hard braking. So the old concept of the school bus as a safe thing, it is a safe thing, but it's not the only kind of safety that matters. And so school buses can both be more safe, but other modes can also be made to be safe, even if they don't do as well, against a Mack truck. The other last point on this outmoded mindset is about who gets to choose and what trade-offs matter. So safety has to be viewed in a broader context of the access to opportunity that we're trying to provide. These other factors that matter to families, and cost being a big one, right? So we always trade off considerations of safety and cost and convenience and comfort and access to do various things. And so who gets to choose? And so one point is about parents having more agency, states having more agencies, districts, localities, programs having more agencies to still consider safety, and that safety is paramount, but that we can be safe in other modes, and the other things matter too. And so that this is an outmoded mindset that we mean to start a new conversation. And we know there's others out there. Some of you are on this call, I know, who are really pushing to change that conversation. We think that's really important, and it's honest. So we're interested in having an honest conversation there. So supply dynamics, demand dynamics. So this is what exists now, right? Like these are the extant challenges within student mobility. What's then also happening are these big seismic changes in our world. And driver shortage has to do with the broader labor market and Amazon and Uber and and a whole host of different things, not just districts failing at recruiting drivers. So driver shortages, but it's real. And it's not going away. Also, it's not a thing that was a COVID thing, and now it's, they're going to come back. It's not. There's for sure corrections happening, and corrections that still need to be made with respect to wages and benefits and the role. And I think there's a lot of work to be done there. But this broader dynamic isn't going away. Cost of inputs, supply chain, cost of fuel. This is a dynamic that is continuing, will continue. Lack of vendor and modal options. So a lot of this is, just a product of some of the structural things, the policies, who's allowed to operate where, what kinds of modes are allowed to operate where, what's funded, what's supported or subsidized. And then it also just takes time. So even if all markets were sort of opened up and regulation was standard across the country, it just takes time for these different options to scale and meet and match to the demand. This on the demand side is the really big underlying dynamic that I think undergirds this whole thing, and that is this: we're talking about being desiring of a future that's learner centric. Well, the reality is that this is happening, and it's true whether your normative view is one of school choice, sort of a black or white, or not school choice or traditional models. The reality is what's happening is that parents are voting with their feet. They're exercising choice. They want choice. We need to ensure equitable access to these different options. We also know that there isn't a one-size-fits-all in education, that kids learn differently and at different paces, and that kids need different sorts of enrichment. And each individually ought to have the right to kind of chart that course for themselves. Again, this is our charge, and this is what we see people are desirous of, and it's happening. And so we have to adapt to it. Now, it doesn't mean that it makes sense that everything is a la carte and piecemeal. We have a normative view too about what kids need, and what the 4 food groups are, what a nutrient dense education looks like. But these demand dynamics are not going away. It's what people want. It's what's happening, and we need to adapt to it. Parents are expecting it. Also relevant parent expectation conversation is, and to that technology and data conversation I mentioned, is, the world around us. Parents want not just options for their kids, but they want our systems to operate now like Amazon and Uber. We weren't built student mobility wasn't built to do that, but parents expect it now, and they think it's the way we ought to be performing. And so that's real. That perception is reality. We can't operate the way we used to operate. And then there's a reality of more students, and this is a byproduct of COVID, certainly, but underlying economic dynamics, more students becoming homeless or experiencing housing instability, more students with specialized needs and IEPs and requiring monitors and door-to-door stops or different kinds of service. And so these are broad dynamics that, again, shape where student mobility needs to go, and the challenges that we're currently facing. So I'm going to pause for a Q&A, and then I'm going to get into talking a little bit about solutions and how we think about, okay, what's next. So if folks are interested in speaking before the rather large group, I invite you to do so, or drop questions in the chat real quick. I see there's some activity. I'll just pause for a second in case anyone wants to interject and share a question. All right. Well, it's a big order to ask a question in front of such a large group. But I hope that means y'all are stewing and thinking about what we've been talking about. So what's next? Want to talk about how we think about a solution framework, and that is, again, what we think needs to happen. And we came up with this framework considering what we're seeing happening in the world, and where we're seeing very interesting bright spots, albeit, when I talked about fragmentation, albeit those things happening in a somewhat disconnected and incoherent way, right? But so analogous, kind of in line with the challenge framework, talk about what we think needs to happen in the policy and funding arena, what we're seeing in terms of the systems themselves, and what needs to happen there. And then on the organizations and people side of things, this is how we're categorizing our solution frame. This is also how we've organized our student mobility hub. And you'll start to see both explanatory white papers and kind of conceptual white papers talking about the challenges and the solutions. Also, you'll start to see some case studies around these various concepts and where we're seeing activity, where we're seeing promise in these different dimensions, where we're seeing evidence of these ecosystems, these interconnected multimodal ecosystems, and innovation happening. And then you'll start to see, and there's some there now, playbooks. So practical, usable toolkits and ways that you, even as policymakers, as funders or advocates, as operators, technology providers, or school administrators, can start to put some of this stuff to work and we can engage you in this work. And so that's what this is all about, and what our future webinars are going to be about. We're going to, the next couple, we're going to talk about, the very next one, we're going to talk about service differentiation, their differentiated support. So I'll spend a beat on that now, but that'll be the topic of our next webinar. And then also, following that, we'll go into another policy topic, but a playbook that we've developed that's on the hub now that you can take a look at. Again, high level kind of policy framework or policy planks that we think take some steps towards creating more uniformity, creating more competition, and allowing for some of this innovation to happen. But broadly speaking, in order to address the challenges that we've posited are the main challenges in student mobility, we think that solutions to break this down need to engender flexibility. So that goes to policy and funding. So what you're able to do, what you're allowed to do, and what's funded, what's supported. I think a very exciting example of what states and funders can do to engender more innovation and illustrate the what's possible when that flexibility is there is the A for Arizona grant program. Now, sustainability of that program and those initiatives is a whole another question, but I think that's a very exciting example of what can happen when when folks are given license to innovate, and also particularly when they're able to do so at the grassroots level, come up with solutions that are locally appropriate. One of our ideas here too is that there isn't this ecosystem approach means that there's a mix and there's a set of solutions that's appropriate in different contexts, and that is the right set of solutions and right various interventions and solutions in right measure to meet the specific goals of an organization in a particular context. And so that gets to the next one, differentiated support, right? Which is that there's an intentionality to the breakdown of who's getting what, and that is in service of equity and in service of adaptability and for the sake of efficiency. And we draw on, when we talk about differentiated support, we talk about we're drawing from instructional models or instructional model of differentiating support where there's strong core for everyone. And this could be in this student transportation mindset, a core yellow bus, highly efficient mass transit network with strategically differentiated and targeted solutions on the margins that are tailored to meet the individualized folks who might, get 90% of their benefit from the core, but might need a little bit extra, or some that need highly differentiated, consistently individualized solutions. Also, again, that the policy and funding picture in student mobility can't be disconnected from ed reform and how schools are funded, and how public transportation is funded and how public infrastructure is funded. On delivery systems, that this is all about breaking down fragmentation, right? That systems, and this cuts across, I'll speak between organizations and people in delivery systems, integrated networks, connected systems, where they can, routing systems can see one another, where we know, student information systems and where students are is connected to what the various providers can see, and that our systems are connected in a seamless manner, that our networks are integrated, that we need to be able to, and that multi-sector collaboration and governance. And so we need to connect the data, we need to connect the actual physical networks, so integration hubs between public transit networks and yellow bus networks, or sedan networks, hub and spoke with yellow bus networks, or ways that these modes can interact and integrate. So that's how the networks can physically integrate, not just IT networks and tech systems, multi-sector collaboration and governance, so that when you're connected, when you're operating in this interconnected way, that there is an approach to govern in a smart way and make decisions, and channel dollars and operate. So this is all quite new, and things that would need to develop. Innovative routing and scheduling solutions. I think one thing, this came out during COVID, there was a lot of innovation on every other day, every other week, different ways to organize programming. And this also includes time, but also space and the physical location of programming that can optimize for how you deploy your transportation resources. And so, thinking outside the box in terms of routing and scheduling is a whole broad area. And then, of course, multimodality, which, again, thinking about walking, thinking about where, if parents can take some of the load, that providing perhaps a stipend, giving them optionality might be appropriate in some instances, where transit can be used, where smaller vehicles can be used instead of buses. How do we optimize our big assets, but also deploy these other options where that makes sense? All of this now going to organizations and people is, we need to expand mindsets, and we need to build this new taxonomy, conversance with these different ideas, and so that policy can change, so that systems can evolve, so that we can work together, because this is an ecosystem problem. It takes all of us and more. And outside of student mobility, And part of that too is we're talking about expanded capacities and mindsets. I mentioned parents and how they consume the services, but also I think those within district administration and funders and those thinking about ed policy and advocacy, that to elevate student mobility to what I think is its rightful place in the strategic conversation about about the future of education more broadly, and then new models of work. So ways to leverage traditional models, but also maybe new models where we can draw upon others, owner drivers, Amazon drivers, parents, staff, others to act and be active providers within our systems. So this is the solutions frame. This is where we're going. We want this to be a conversation that continues with all of you. We're excited to launch this today. Our next webinar is going to be in a few weeks. We're going to talk about differentiated service and how we're going to really dig into the weeds on that topic. But I think it's still a pretty broad topic, and we'll go from there and hope that the conversation continues, and excited to enlist all of you in that and bring about this future of student mobility together. So thank you for your time today. And if you have questions, happy to stay on and take those now. Yes, if you'd like to unmute, I think you can request it. Yeah. I see some are following or typing questions, so that's great. So we'll hang on. And I will, again, we'll post the video, not this part, probably, but we'll post the video to the Student Mobility Hub, and we'll share that with everybody here. Also, folks could raise their hand too, I think, and we can unmute you. We will share the recording, and yes, we'll share the presentation as well. I think we'll post both to the Student Mobility Hub, to the website. We'll share that link, and then we can share the presentation as well to the group that attended today. So thank you for that. I hope everybody is enjoying unseasonably warm weather like we are in Minnesota, and that we're not distracted by I think there's a snowblower behind me at our co-working space that until a few days ago, I didn't think I would have to contend with a snowblower. Okay, a question from Kayla Ward. Flexibility is an interest to me personally. Can you give me some examples in a district you help with what has changed or modified to help students? Yeah, so when we talk about flexibility, thank you for that question, Kayla. So I think there's the idea of how can modes or units of supply be deployed more flexibly to respond to needs in more real time or on intervals that are faster than what is typical. So, to the time typically to change a bus route or change a van route or add a stop, that a lot of times districts, especially charters, can sometimes be more adaptive, and or vans can be more adaptive than buses, but it might take a week to add a new stop, and there's reasons for that because it affects other kids and their times and families' expectations. There's good reason to to have stability, but the reality is, like I said, if you were to go to the curb and observe how families and students use the system that's provided, you'll see that it's not just the days that they're not using it. It's not just because they're sick. It's because they're staying after school, or they need to go to different places or job sites, or their parents need to pick them up on different days for different reasons, or they've got doctor's appointments and these kinds of things. So there's really an underlying complex demand that systems aren't able to flex and meet. And if they could flex and meet them, in theory, and address the challenges of what that means to others on the route, for example, changing times at bus stops willy-nilly every day isn't a good idea. But if you can, skip a stop and it's in the afternoon, or the last stop in the afternoon, let's say, that saves time and saves some gas. Or if you can add a stop and do so, or have systems internally to adapt and let students ride to existing stops or ride other modes from day to day, and you can keep track of that to ensure student safety. If you can pull that off, that takes data, it takes a lot of smart connected systems, then you can provide better service. You can give students access to those opportunities that, again, what we see is that the families with private means that have vehicles and flexible jobs and work schedules can take their kids to sports programs and camps and other things, piano lessons, whereas others, that if they don't have a means of doing it, they won't, and so they'll revert back to what they can get, which is often highly inflexible. But and then it also there's modes now, more on-demand kinds of services that you can book emergency rides. That's flexibility, so it's flexibility to provide more and better service and adaptive service. Also flexibility to help districts contain costs. My former professor at Northwestern, Karen Smilowitz, who does a lot of research on this, talks about a convex hull, which is that we overcapacitate, we design too much capacity to try to serve the complex demand in our systems. But if we could adapt and actually design a system that meets all those intricate demand nooks of the system, and then adapt as all that changes, because these systems are dynamic, they're not the same. We could have a more sustainable system too. We'd save money, we'd reduce emissions and VMT. And I guess an example, you asked for a practical example. One example, I would say, creative ways that we and other clients and others I know are using, I think, flexible small vehicle supply, like Hop, Skip, Drive, Ever-Driven. We use taxis in right measure, where there are more on-demand needs, or where you have cancellation policies that if students are absent in the afternoon, you don't need to run them or they're absent in the morning, you don't need to run those services in the afternoon. And again, saving a driver that could be allocated elsewhere, creating some more capacity where someone else could be added, and saving some money. That's a good example. And again, responding to meet the need. Another kind of flexibility that I would say, again, if you would think about it as flexibility, but transit passes. Now, transit is a very fixed mode, but it's flexible. Like, the stop doesn't move. The stop is as far away from you as and your home address as it always is, for the most part. Those systems don't change very often. But if you miss the bus, there's one after. Or if you need to get to school earlier, there might be a run before that you can take. Or if students who have transit passes, need to stay after school, and that school is well served by a transit line, a bus line, or a train, they can stay late. And so that's a flexibility in a seemingly inflexible system. And I've seen that used very smartly. It can also be used as a blunt instrument, an inequitable sort of solution. So that's where these solutions need to be smart and differentiated and data-driven in how they're deployed. Thank you, Kayla. I'm losing some folks, but that's okay. I've used almost all the hour, and I'd love to give folks 2 minutes back. I appreciate you being here and staying on for the whole hour. We will share the recording, we will share the deck, and I hope you join us next time. Happy New Year. Thanks, everybody.